RPGs are amazing, and if you love them as much as I do, then you're probably over the moon at all the new releases in the genre this year. We've had a remake of one of the most quintessential JRPGs ever created, a DLC for the hardest of hardcore action RPGs, and a new entry for one of the most beloved themes in the RPG space. And I bet you thought I was talking about Dragon Age there, but we'll get onto that later. Suffice it to say, there was no better time to be into this genre. There was genuinely something for every type of fan this year, and it looks like it'll only get better in the new year. So let's take a look back at all of the amazing games that we played in 2024, the year of the RPG. I love Ichiban, and he's one of my favourite video game characters of the last however many years. And at the start of the year, we were treated to Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Finally, the series was going out of Japan, and I couldn't have been more excited for it. Now, leading up to this, I had the delusion of beating every single Yakuza game before Infinite Wealth was released, and you could probably guess how that went. I started with Kiwami 1 and got so frustrated at the combat that I gave up on that dream, and instead, I just played and beat Yakuza Like a Dragon, and it might be one of the greatest JRPGs of all time. All the systems flow so well into one another, the combat system is inventive with bonkers classes that excited me to see what every new one brought. And then you get into the story. It can be the most serious stuff like influencing the whole political system of Japan to the most ridiculous crap all within minutes of each other. It evokes almost every single emotion in one playthrough, and few games can really do that. I fell in love with the Like a Dragon series because of Yakuza Like a Dragon, and I was hoping to cover the Infinite Wealth, but unfortunately I couldn't find the time. I made a deal with myself at the start of the year that I would be more deliberate with the games I play and cover on the channel. Unfortunately, Infinite Wealth didn't make it on the ballot this year, but I'm hoping to fix that over the Christmas break. This is where things start to get crazy. A new action RPG in a franchise that was never released in the West, a remake of one of the most beloved JRPGs of all time, a sequel in a remake trilogy that I was excited for, and a surprise VR game that I should have loved. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an epic of a game. Now, I wasn't around for the launch of the original, I was -1 years old, but I did grow up with older JRPGs, watching my brother and my dad play them, and they captured my imagination like no other. And the pre-PS2 JRPGs needed a certain level of buy-in from the player. Yes, Final Fantasy VII was a 3D game, but when you were walking on the overworld map, you had to fill in the gaps with your mind. But now Final Fantasy VII Rebirth did that for us and filled in the gaps between the towns we loved. I didn't actually beat the original Final Fantasy VII until 2020. Before, I'd only ever watched it being played, but I could remember every single town in the game. And now you can see the likes of the Golden Saucer come to life, the way the developers probably wanted to do back in '97, but were limited by the hardware. When it comes to JRPGs, I always talk about heart, and the best ones have an undeniable heart to them. A full cast of colourful characters that you can fall in love with, and Rebirth gives you that in spades. Yes, it can be extremely cheesy and a bit on the nose, but when all is said and done, I will remember the journey through Midgar better than most games I have ever played. To top it all off, I think Rebirth has the best combat system of any RPG I have ever played. It perfectly blends the tactical side of turn-based combat and the fast-paced nature of action combat. You have different attacks, elemental weaknesses and stagger bars, and you're just constantly thinking in combat, which is great because after the disappointment that was Final Fantasy XVI, I was so happy to see a combat system that is properly implemented. 16 was all flash and no substance, but Rebirth had both. It looked and felt cool, but also had you thinking about when to swap to different characters and when to use certain abilities to maximize your stagger or damage. And even though Rebirth can feel a little bit bloated, I was still engaged for God knows how many hours it took me to beat this absolute gem of an RPG. Grand Blue Fantasy is one of them action JRPGs, and by that, I mean the ones that can hit you if you're in the right mood, but otherwise their depth can become a bit of an issue. There isn't much wrong with the game, it looks beautiful, it runs smoothly, and it feels fine to play, and there's loads of characters to choose from that offer a fair bit of variety and grinding to level up if that's your thing. The only thing is though, I haven't played this game since launch, I didn't beat it back then, and now I can't remember almost anything about it, which says a lot. Again, it's not bad, just not great. Legendary Tales should have been a Game of the Year contender for me. It has one of the best VR combat systems I've ever seen, and it's a loot-based action RPG, kind of like Diablo, and it's a match made in heaven. You can block, parry, slash, strike, and bludgeon enemies, and it feels so satisfying. And I think the cool factor plays a massive role in VR games. Regardless of how dumb you look playing it, if you feel cool while you're doing it, then you'll enjoy it more. And I can't lie, parrying an enemy and then follow up to hit them with the butter your weapon, and then do a giant overhead slash just simply feels cool. But it works in a vacuum. Your first couple of hours will feel amazing, but then it starts to sink in that all the environments are bland, the enemy variety is awful, there's undead, there's skeletons, and then there's goblins to fight, and yeah, they have different weapons to make them feel slightly different, but after a couple of hours, it just gets bland. The onboarding is awful, and trying to figure out how to do anything requires you to read a poorly translated wall of text, and eventually I just stopped playing because it didn't change after like 6 or 7 hours of a playthrough, and it's a shame because now every single melee combat game I play in VR pales in comparison to it, and I hope a sequel could fix a lot of the problems that this game does have. As for Persona 3 Reload, I had to defer to my brother. He loves it, just like he loves all the other Atlas RPGs, and I thought I wasn't a big fan of the formula until Metaphor ReFantazio released, and I realised that it's mostly the high school setting that turns me off these games. Dragon's Dogma is a series that I should love. There's no reason why I don't. It's a class-based action RPG with weighty combat, it doesn't hold your hand, and it just kind of feels more unique than most RPGs. But I don't like it that much. I've tried to play Dark Arisen multiple times, but it feels a bit boring. I would say I've started up at least 5 times, and every time I give up after a few hours. I can see that there is something about the Dragon's Dogma series, but you kind of have to peel away a lot of stuff that I dislike and to get to it, and I was hoping that Dragon's Dogma 2 would fix a lot of them problems. It definitely did to some extent. It's way easier to see the special sauce of what makes Dragon's Dogma thick, but I didn't love it. What I enjoyed about the game is how adventurous it felt. I will never forget my first time playing Oblivion or Skyrim. They just evoke this genuine sense of freedom that most games struggle to do. And yeah, it was because of the age I played them at. I was 9 or 10 when I first played Oblivion, and then 13 when I played Skyrim. So a younger brain will always be able to get lost in a world easier than an adult brain that has actual things to worry about. And ever since Skyrim, I've been searching for that feeling of a world that was dangerous, but at the same time invited me to explore every inch of it. And if I'm being honest, Breath of the Wild and maybe Kingdom Come Deliverance are probably the only games that did that since Skyrim. But now I'd put Dragon's Dogma 2 on the list. It's a slower paced experience where you are forced to exist in the world by slowly walking to your destination or taking a cart to go from town to town. And you never know what you'll find along the way. You might get ambushed by goblins, or your cart might be broken in the middle of the night, or you might see a troll and a griffin fighting on the top of the mountain. And that is the special side of Dragon's Dogma 2. And I wanted to focus on that because I think it has a lot of problems that chip away over a full playthrough, like a lack of enemy variety leading to some stale combat encounters, and boring quest design, and eventually I think the game just kind of runs out of a bit of steam. But I want to remember Dragon's Dogma 2 for its immersion. Now, April was quite the month. There was a Mr. Krabs Souls-like called Sheldon Ring, an early access game that was a bit underbaked, but I think I will love when it fully releases. An anime action RPG that was bland and I got some serious hate for disliking. And Stellar Blade, the game that saved gaming. And yes, that is a joke. Another Krabs treasure is Baby's First Souls-like, but its soft and cutesy exterior makes it way more accessible, and if you're struggling, you could just give your crab a gun, which is always fun. When a game sticks to a bit and properly executes on it, I think it's fantastic. Another Krabs treasure is set in a polluted ocean, and the items and towns are all crafted out of rubbish that would be at the bottom of the sea. The majority of the weapons and shells are common household items like little cocktail swords or bottle caps or shot glasses, and I loved picking them up and seeing what their special abilities were. Then in the towns, the medieval banners are ketchup packets and the houses are made out of cardboard, and it's clearly a commentary on pollution and what we are doing to our ocean, and I think it's brilliant. Plus, you can dress up as Mr. Krabs, and the game has a lot of platforming, so it kind of feels like a Souls-like Battle for Bikini Bottom, which I couldn't be happier with. As for the rest of the games this month, I didn't play too much. No Rest for the Wicked was sparse on content at launch, and I finished it, and the highlight is the level design. I had a great time finding secret areas and chests, and it really gave me that old Souls-like feel in the level design, but the city building aspects and collecting resources to build up certain parts of the town are just kind of annoying, and the combat is in a good spot, but needs a fair bit of refinement. And overall, I think the main thing that this game needs is a lot of quality of life improvements for the inventory management and things like that, because it just became tedious, and I can only imagine how tedious that will become over, say, a 20, 30 or 40 hour long playthrough. Sandland was my first anime game. It was the first anime I have ever watched, and this is a bang average game. Everything works, it runs and looks good, but there was nothing remarkable about it, so I gave up after a while. It's also a retelling of the anime, which was already a retelling of the anime movie, and I had watched both of them, so there was no real reason for me to keep playing, and I got a lot of hate on Game Explain's channel for saying that. Paper Mario The 1000-Year Door was released this month, and I know people love it and I've never played it, but I know it's like a 30 or 40 hour long Mario RPG, and in general I hate the pacing and handholdiness of these games, and maybe someday I'll play it, but not anytime soon. Of course, we all know what released this month, and that is Shadow the Earth Tree. This was when I went hard in on my goal of properly reviewing games. I took my time and I beat Elden Ring before this, and if I do say so myself, I released the best video I've ever made. When Elden Ring came out, I had something like 5 days to hit the review embargo, so there was no way I could beat it. I got the Malekith, and then I had to stop to get the review out. Long story short, another load of releases came out after that, so I had to move on. And then when I got my Steam Deck, I started it up, and I got 20 hours in. My Steam Deck broke and I had to get it replaced. And the universe just didn't want me to beat Elden Ring. But 2 years after its release, I finally did, and I adored the game. I made a whole video on how it became my favourite game of all time, so it's there if you want to go watch it. Anyway, I was so ready to play Shadow the Earth Tree, and they fixed a lot of the problems with FromSoft DLCs. Now, before I go any further, I'm not saying that the others are easy, because they certainly aren't, but typically in the DLC areas you are fairly highly leveled, and it makes them a lot easier than they probably should be, barring a few bosses of course. But the new Skidoo tree system that basically put everyone down to the same level kind of fixed the problem. Enemies at the start of the DLC would absolutely wreck me. And in a game like Elden Ring, where I have put well over 100 hours into it, there's very few areas that genuinely scare me, and I like the fact that going into this DLC, I felt scared again. Arguably, my favourite thing about Elden Ring was the build diversity and changing out classes and trying out different weapons and all that good stuff. And Earth Tree added loads of new weapons and new types, so I had a great time swapping new weapons in and out, and finally finding that cool dead sunflower hammer, and it's probably my favourite weapon in a FromSoft game ever now. The main problem though is that they fecked up on the final boss, and yes, give me all the get good comments in the comment section down below, I don't care. But some of the combos in this fight are complete bullshit, and I had to change my build to fight him, which didn't happen with any other Elden Ring boss. And on a personal note, both of these videos did really well, and they certainly changed the trajectory of the channel, and now I'm moving more towards RPG stuff, so it all worked out really well. Monster Hunter Stories 1 and 2 released on consoles this month as well, which was great to see. They're pretty simple Pokemon likes, but it was a great way for me to get a foot in the door with a franchise that I struggled with previously. Just like Dragon's Dogma, I should love Monster Hunter, but I don't, and I am trying to remedy that now. I have a whole video on it if you want to watch it. But the story series is a great way to get to grips with Monster Hunter and see what it has to offer. It helped big time, and as I said, I'm now starting a whole Monster Hunter pilgrimage, so check out that video and I will have something on Wilds next year. So nothing really released in July, and I know there's loads of games that I haven't even spoken about already, but you know, I'm only one man. But now, in August, the biggest game of the year launched, Black Myth Wukong, and it absolutely blew the internet up. I knew people were excited about this game since its initial reveal in 2020, but Jesus Christ, I couldn't have predicted just how big it was going to be. It sold 18 million copies in 2 weeks, and it seemed that every single person was playing it. Streamers were streaming it. Content creators were creating content about it, and I was excited. It was a story I had never really experienced in Journey to the West. It was a AAA production from a first-time team in China, so I was hoping it would be great. And if I'm being honest, I think the reaction was a bit over the top to this game. I saw a tweet stating that if Black Myth doesn't win Game of the Year, then it's rigged. I saw people saying that it's the best game ever made, and I just don't understand it. Now, before I talk about it, I don't think the game is bad. I just don't think it's good enough to warrant its playtime, and I ultimately gave up after a while because I just had enough. And it was mostly for one reason, and that is the level design. I have a whole video about Black Myth being a Souls-like. It's there if you want to watch it, and also another one on why I gave up on it. But the Souls games are renowned for their amazing level design because everything is deliberate, the areas feel expansive while also being clear on where you can and can't go, and the games constantly reward you for your exploration with new enemies or weapons or chests or all that sort of stuff. And Black Myth does have good sections in terms of level design. The prison has very rigid paths, it has secrets, and also a gameplay mechanic in the strange thing that took all your health that makes it feel tense. But all of the open areas, which is the majority of the game, suffer from a too many ways to go problem, and it ruins it for me. The levels are typical snowy mountains, wooded forests, and sandy deserts, but it seems like they took real life pictures of landscapes, translated them into the game engine, and then did nothing to actually make them feel like levels. There were random invisible walls that made no sense. Oftentimes after a checkpoint you could have 4 or 5 different ways to go, and it felt overwhelming. And then there were areas that looked like you should be able to go to them, but you'll find a dead end with nothing useful at the end, and it just ruined the exploration for me. Look, it's a great first attempt for a new studio, and I have no doubt that Black Myth 2 could be phenomenal, but it needs a lot of work. And on a side note, if you want a game that lets you play as Wukong but better, play Raven's Watch. It's a great roguelike. Just as I was done with Black Myth, Visions of Mana came out, and I didn't know what to feel about this. In 2020, I played the Trials of Mana remake, which cleverly I called it the Trials of Mana because the game really was just that. But I understand that that was a remake of an old game, so maybe that's why the combat felt uninspired and it had absolutely zero depth. But Visions of Mana didn't change that. I got a code for it, streamed the first few hours, and didn't touch it after that. This is one of them games, just like Grand Blue Fantasy, it didn't hit me at the right time, and it's just not so good that you have loads to talk about it, but it's also not so bad that you have a laundry list of crap to just whine about. It's just right down the middle of, this is a game. It has no interesting characters, the combat system feels fine, it looks flashy, the game runs well, but there's no depth, nothing to this game. I just stopped playing. Starfield Shattered Space isn't good, and I would actually say it makes Starfield a worse package overall, and I'm so disappointed that I'm saying that. I finally beat Starfield this year right before Shattered Space, and I love the characters and companions as well as some of the factions, and I think the main story is the best Bethesda has ever done. But what I hated was not feeling like I was in the world. There was no mental map for me of, this town is right beside this cave, which is where I fought this giant enemy or found this cool item. All I did is get a mission, fast travel, rinse and repeat, and I was hoping Shattered Space was going to fix this. It was on one planet, one map, and they added a rover just before so that you could drive around and feel like you were on the planet. But it failed in almost every single way. Firstly, I didn't find any truly interesting locations on the map. There isn't a single quest that stands out in my head a few months on from beating it, and they didn't use Andreja whatsoever. I deliberately didn't loot my saves so that I could still have Andreja in my party and finally get to travel to her home planet and learn about the House Varun, and she barely interacts with any NPCs or chimes in during dialogue. It felt like wasted potential. And don't get me started on the rover. What an awful vehicle. It was only useful for jetpacking around because the terrain wasn't built for the rover. Anotri, the last song released, and the main takeaway from it is its level design. The majority of Souls-likes pale in comparison to FromSoft in a lot of aspects. Lies of P is the best example of one that gets a lot right, like levels, bosses, weapons, and just the overall feel. And Anotria is pretty good too. We're used to exploring depressing locations in Souls games, but Anotria is set in Italy and it's built upon Italian folklore, and I love the look of some of the levels in this game, they're just beautiful. The only thing is that the game ran poorly on my PC and I wanted to wait for patches, but this is the unfortunate reality of doing this sort of content stuff. A game gets its moment when it releases, and if it isn't ready at that point, I just have to move on and probably won't find the time to play it anytime soon. I had fun this month, but Jesus Christ, I think I played too many games. Metaphor ReFantasio finally did what no other Atlas game has ever done for me. I previously played Persona 4 Golden and Persona 5, and every time I got like 10 to 15 hours in and gave up. And I think it's a combination of pacing and the high school setting. Most would agree that Atlas RPGs can get wordy, and not in a good way. In a way where characters are repeating plot points over and over again, and throughout an 80+ hour RPG that can get really annoying, so it always turned me off them. And don't get me wrong, Metaphor does the same. Some hours go by where you barely touch the controller, but the rest of the game is so strong and compelling that I can look past it. I'm a mark for fantasy, so that goes a long way, and I love how everything matters. What quests you do on whatever day, how you spend your money, or which friends you spend time with, it all matters, and I'm loving it so far. Now, I have only played about 10 hours since I uploaded my video, but I don't mind chipping away at it in the background, and I'd like to finish it over the Christmas break. And the reason why I put it on the back burner was because of a game that I was so excited for. Dragon Age The Veilguard worried me, mostly because of the marvelly tone of the first trailer. And my worries weren't misplaced because it lacks teeth. Tonally, it isn't Dragon Age. It's so colourful and lighthearted for 90% of the game that I feel like I'm in a different series. And that's backed up by the characters and dialogue choice, and that's in air quotes if you can't get that. You're not allowed to be even slightly mean or to put somebody in their place. Early on, you have to pick between two towns that are being attacked, and the character that is associated with the area you didn't help will disappear for a while, and when they come back, it's like all is forgiven in about 5 minutes. They try to give it consequences in the gameplay by changing how the character plays during combat, but it isn't enough to make it matter. In previous games, a party member would end up leaving the party over a decision like that, but here they are just mildly annoyed by you. Now the gameplay kinda saves it and it turns it into a totally fine game, but one that ran for too long and leaves me with zero desire to ever play it again. The highlight is the exploration. It took some inspiration from the likes of God of War 2018, giving you little puzzles to do, hidden chests to find, and things like that make it a very playable game. Nothing gives you too much of a challenge, but in turn you can sink hours upon hours into just exploring and fighting, which I appreciated for the first half of the game. But after that, I ran out of the drive to keep exploring. I wanted to beat the game and move on, and it's mostly because of the lack of depth in combat. Now don't get me wrong, it's a competent system. It feels good with loads of flashy particle effects and combos and all sorts, and if this was in a live service game, I think a lot would be forgiven. But there isn't anything to it. You can get your party members to use abilities that prime and detonate, but once they use one skill then they're on cooldown and useless until their cooldowns come back. And I have a full video if you want to check it out, but I don't think I'll think about this game anymore now that this video is done. Dragon Quest is a series that I have almost no experience with. I played a lot of 11 but never beat it, and strangely, I also played Dragon Quest Swords on the Wii for my retro channel this year, so check that out in the description if you want. And Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D came out and I approached it from a very different angle. Typically with older games, I like to look at them through a modern lens and talk about certain things that don't hold up nowadays or things that do hold up, but instead, I just enjoyed the ride. I treated it as a history lesson and soaked in the experience of playing one of the most highly regarded JRPGs of all time. It was my first 2D Dragon Quest and the HD 2D art looks gorgeous. I love seeing all the updated sprites for these iconic enemies. And even though this is a similar situation to Metaphor where I'm just chipping away at it in the background, I don't mind that. I'm just playing half an hour or an hour every couple of days, listening to a podcast, maybe just soaking in some of the music. I'm just enjoying it. I'm not taking it too serious or anything, and I'm having a great time. Mario and Luigi Brothership also released this month, but I didn't pick it up for a few reasons. One, the performance on Switch would annoy me. I put Echoes of Wisdom down this year because of the performance, and I'm just going to wait till the Switch 2 to play it, and I'll probably do the same with Mario and Luigi Brothership. Also, as I already said, with the Mario RPG stuff, I just hate how handholdy and dialogue heavy they are. They just don't seem to respect your time, except for Superstar Saga, which is mostly gameplay focused. And again, I covered that on the retro channel and I actually really liked it, and that's why I was excited for Mario and Luigi Brothership, but the reviews kind of scared me off. Maybe one day I'll get to it, but not anytime soon. December had two big releases and I haven't played either because I'm absolutely swamped with games, but I will get to them at some point. Fantasia Neo Dimension, a game that I was constantly calling Neo Dimension Fantasian, looks great. I've always been interested in it since Sakaguchi created it and Nobuo Uematsu did the music, but it was trapped on Apple Arcade, and even if I had an iPhone, I wouldn't play a JRPG on a phone. But now it's on console and I do want to try it out. Again, once I finish all these other crazy RPGs and all these other games that I have to play. And then Path of Exile 2 release, and that is more up my alley, and from what I've seen, it looks like a more hardcore Diablo, and people are saying it's a bit more involved with dodge rolling and learning attack patterns of bosses like a Souls game, so I can't wait to play it, but I'll probably wait for a couple of updates and patches, or maybe just for its full release. Now after playing all of these RPGs this year, I feel like John Coffey in the Green Mile. I mean, this was all while I still played the likes of Rocket League and Overwatch and now Marvel Rivals, as well as covering stuff on Retribution and freelance for Game Explain earlier on in this year, so I'm looking forward to a break. Right now though, I'm playing through Kingdom Come Deliverance and Monster Hunter World for two massive videos in the new year. I've had a great time and the channel has only been going up over the past 6 months or so, so if you've watched this far or even just watched one video on this channel, then thank you very much. Let me know what your favourite RPG of the year is. Please subscribe if you want, I can't really tell you what to do. And join the channel members down below if you really want to support the channel. All the support is greatly appreciated and I'll see you all next year.